Usually when we talk about reading, we really just focus entirely on the meaning of the words, right?
Right, yeah. The content itself.
Exactly. Like if I hand you a menu or say a warning sign, your brain just instantly bypasses the ink and goes straight to the message.
It's totally automatic.
Yeah. You see the shapes and the voice in your head immediately just says, coffee is $3 or danger, high voltage. We treat the letters as completely transparent windows into the meaning.
Oh, for sure.
We like to think the information is just flowing straight into our minds, pure and unfiltered.
Well, it's an automatic translation. By the time you're an adult, you've completely lost the ability to look at a word and just see shapes.
Yep, that's so true.
You can't just look at the word S.P and appreciate the geometry of the S, or like the negative space inside the O. Your brain literally forces you to read it.
It's just binary.
Exactly. You see the word, you know the meaning, the actual architecture of the letters is entirely invisible to you.
But then, you step into the world of graphic design and typography, and suddenly you realize those windows aren't transparent at all.
Not even a little bit.
They're stained glass. Like, we are actually looking at this intricate, invisible architecture underlying literally everything we read.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
The specific shape of a single letter, the thickness of a line, the tiny little curve at the bottom of a T, all of these elements can entirely change the mood, the authority, and even the historical weight of a message before your brain has even processed a single syllable.
It is the absolute definition of hiding in plain sight. It's an entire psychological and historical landscape that most of us are completely blind to.
Even though we stare directly at it for hours every single day.
Right. But the moment you start noticing how a lowercase g is constructed, or, why the spacing between lines is set to a specific fraction of a millimeter, you start to see the matrix.
And today, we are going to hand you the red pill. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're doing an extensive exploration of Chapter 5 from the book Graphic Design Reference plus Specification.
It's such a great chapter.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to decode the unique language of the printed word. We want to transform you, the listener, from a passive consumer of text into a typography detective.
I love that term, typography detective.
Right, because by the end of this conversation, you're going to understand exactly why certain texts feel deeply traditional, why others feel hyper-modern, why some just scream for your attention, and why others, make you feel physically exhausted after reading them for 5 minutes.
It really is like learning a new language. Once you see the underlying grid, the deliberate choices, and the historical ghosts living inside your word processor, you just can't unsee them.
No, you really can't.
You will never look at a billboard, a book cover, or even just an email the same way again. Typography is the clothing that words wear. And right now, most people are walking around not realizing they're surrounded by highly specific fashion choices.
Exactly. Now, before we jump into the architecture of the alphabet, just a quick bit of housekeeping. If you're enjoying these deep dives and want to keep training your brain to see the hidden structures of the world around you, make sure you subscribe to the channel.
Definitely subscribe.
And because typography is a deeply visual subject, if you want to hold the physical copy of this book in your hands and actually look at the beautiful visual specimens we're going to be obsessing over today, you can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or just find the book link in the description below.
Yeah, having the visual reference is huge.
Trust me, if you're a visual thinker, it is a gorgeous reference book to have on your desk.
It bridges the gap between historical theory and practical everyday application perfectly. It doesn't just tell you what things are, it shows you how they work as tools.
So to start seeing these tools, we have to get our vocabulary straight. And I'm not talking about basic grammar here. I want to dive straight into the great terminology debate that probably drives graphic designers absolutely crazy, especially in the digital age.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, the massive fundamental difference between a typeface and a font.
Yes, the big one.
Because I'll admit, for years, I used those words completely interchangeably. I'd say, oh, I love the Helvetica font. But that's technically wrong, isn't it?
It is technically wrong, yeah. Though, to be fair, it's probably the most common mix-up in the world today. The digital revolution completely blurred these two terms for the average person.
I'm frank, because of drop-down menus.
Exactly. But historically and functionally for professionals, the distinction is massive. A typeface is the design of a single set of letterforms, numerals, and punctuation marks unified by consistent visual properties.
Okay, so it's the design.
Right, it is the artistic vision. It's the intellectual property itself.
Got it. So it's like the blueprint. If I'm an architect, The typeface is the set of drawings I create. It's the idea of Palatino. It's the specific way I decided the curves of the P relate to the straight lines of the L.
Yes, that's a perfect analogy. The typeface is the creative design. The font, on the other hand, is the delivery mechanism.
Okay.
It is the complete set of letter forms that allows for actual typesetting. It's the physical or digital tool you use to execute that blueprint.
So if the typeface is the architectural blueprint, the font is the actual bricks, mortar, and cranes we use to build the house.
Precisely.
Like the typeface is the abstract concept of Palatino, but the font is the specific .otf or TTF software file sitting on my hard drive that my computer accesses when I hit a key.
That's the modern digital version of it, yes.
Right.
But to really grasp why they are two totally different words, you have to go back to the physical reality of printing.
Like back to letterpress.
Exactly. Before computers, before photo typesetting, a font was quite literally a heavy wooden drawer filled with hundreds of tiny metal blocks.
Wow.
Yeah, if you wanted to print something, you bought a drawer. You'd have one drawer for 12-point times New Roman. That specific drawer was a font.
Right, because it's a physical collection of metal letters.
Exactly. Now, if you wanted to print the title larger, you couldn't use those little 12-point metal blocks. You had to reach for a completely separate, much heavier drawer for, say, 24-point times New Roman.
Oh, I see.
That was a different font. Both fonts belonged to the same typeface times New Roman, but they were entirely separate physical objects. You could own the 12-point font and just not own the 24-point font.
That makes the distinction so much clearer. So when I'm scrolling through Microsoft Word or Google Docs today, the drop-down menu is labeled font, but it's really showing me a list of typefaces.
Exactly. It's a misnomer in the software.
My computer is just miraculously generating the specific font on the fly based on the size and weight I select.
Yes. The software is rendering the tool in real time. And for design professionals, maintaining this distinction isn't just pedantry, it's a legal and structural reality.
What do you mean by legal?
Well, you license a font file, you admire a typeface design, you might love a specific typeface, but if you don't own the proper digital fonts for all its variations, the bold, the italic, the condensed problem, you literally can't build your project.
Which perfectly brings us to those variations. When we start modifying the weight or the angle of that blueprint, we enter the territory of type styles.
Right.
We're talking about taking that core design and tweaking its parameters. We can change the weight, making it light, medium, bold, or black. We can change the width, making it condensed or extended. Or we can change the angle, shifting it from Roman, which just means upright. Right.
Yes, Roman is just the standard upright posture.
Shifting it from Roman to italic or oblique.
And this is where the genius of typography really shines. Because if the typeface is the blueprint, the style is deciding whether to build the house out of red brick, yellow brick, or glass.
Oh, that's good.
It's the same fundamental skeleton, the same underlying geometry, but the mood, the impact, and the hierarchy shift dramatically. A heavy black weight screams authority and permanence. A light, italic weight whispers elegance and motion.
And when you bundle all those styles together, you get a type family.
Yes.
The source material points specifically to the Universe family as a prime example of this. It's a massive range of style variations based on a single typeface. You have Universe 45 light, Universe 75 black, condensed versions, extended versions.
It's huge.
But the crucial part is that despite all these radical weight changes, they retain a distinct visual continuity.
A large type family like Universe is basically a Swiss Army knife for a designer.
How so?
Well, think about the alternative. If you are laying out a complex magazine spread, you need different visual textures for the main headline, the subheadline, the body text, the photo captions, and the page numbers.
Right, lots of different levels of information.
Exactly. If you mix 5 completely different typefaces together, the page looks chaotic. It looks like a ransom note.
Oh yeah, just a jumbled mess.
The reader's eye gets completely exhausted trying to process 5 different aesthetic rules at once.
But if you use the type family, it's like a family reunion. Everyone looks a little different. Some are taller, some are wider, some are heavier, but you can definitely tell they share the same DNA.
That's a great way to put it.
They all have the same nose, the same cheekbones. So you can use Universe Black for the headline, Universe Medium Italic for the subhead, and Universe Light for the body text.
Exactly. The visual continuity remains unbroken. The design feels cohesive, professional, and trustworthy, but there is enough structural contrast to guide the reader's eye exactly where you want it to go.
So you're creating a hierarchy.
Yes, you are creating a hierarchy of information without breaking the visual harmony of the page.
Okay, so we know what a typeface is, and we know how type families give us a toolkit. But out of the thousands of typefaces available, how do we actually decide which one to use?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because it's not just about what looks pretty, is it? It's about how the human brain processes information. And that brings us to the ultimate typographic test, the dividing line that separates the workhorses from the show pony's legibility.
Function over form, or, well, more accurately, how form serves function. When we talk about typography, we aren't just talking about art, we are talking about cognitive psychology and human biology.
To understand that, we have to look at the two major classifications established by type manufacturers: text typefaces and display typefaces.
Right.
Let's start with text typefaces. These are the ones we use for large, dense areas of text, novels, newspaper articles, long web pages. The classics are Times, Arial, Garamond.
The ones you see everywhere.
Yeah. The source says they are highly legible, they have a traditional look, and they are built specifically to be easy on the eye.
We really need to unpack what easy on the eye actually means biologically.
Please do, because it sounds like just a marketing phrase.
It does, but it's very real. When you read a line of text, your eyes don't smoothly pan across the words like a video camera. They don't.
No. They make rapid, jerky movements called saccades.
Saccades, okay.
Yeah. Your eye jumps, stops for a fraction of a second to take in a cluster of letters that's called a fixation, and then jumps again.
Wait, really? So reading is actually a series of rapid microscopic jumps and stops?
Exactly. And your brain stitches those stops together into a continuous stream of meaning.
That is wild. I always thought my eyes were just gliding.
It feels like gliding because your brain is doing a lot of processing work in the background. Now, text typefaces, like Garamond, are the result of centuries of meticulous refinement aimed at optimizing those saccadic jumps.
How do they do that?
Well, the proportions of the letters are perfectly balanced, the spacing is incredibly predictable, there is an even rhythm to the positive and negative space. This allows the human eye to jump across the line, predicting the shapes before they even fully come into focus.
So they reduce cognitive friction.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
The designer's ultimate goal with a text typeface is to basically make it completely invisible.
Right.
You don't want the reader to notice the font. You want the text to vanish so the author's voice can take over.
Right.
It's like driving on a freshly paved, perfectly straight highway. You aren't thinking about the asphalt, you're just enjoying the drive.
That's spot on. But then you have display typefaces, and these are the exact opposite.
Right.
They are decorative, highly stylized, and frankly, not nearly as legible. We're talking about fonts like Impact, Old English, or, you know, those wild 1970s bubble letters.
Oh man, yeah.
You use them for short bursts, logo types, headlines, single words.
So if text typefaces are the freshly paved highway, display typefaces are a cobblestone street covered in speed bumps.
Basically, yeah.
Which begs the question, if they're so much harder to read, why do we use them at all?
Because sometimes catching attention is way more critical than sustained reading.
Okay, that makes sense.
A stop sign doesn't need to be comfortable to read for an hour. It needs to hit your brain instantly. Impact is a typeface that lives up to its name. It's thick, it's heavy, it shouts.
It demands your attention from across the room.
Exactly. Display typefaces set a mood, an attitude, an emotional frequency before you even read the word.
But I want to push back on this a little, or at least explore the extreme edge of it.
Sure.
What physically happens if you violate this rule? Let's say I decide I want to be really edgy, and I print an entire 500-page fantasy novel in a display font, like a really dense, ornate Old English text.
Oh.
What happens to the reader's biology?
Oh, it would be an absolute nightmare. It would be an act of hostility against the reader. Let's think about the cognitive load and those saccadic eye movements we just talked about.
The jumping.
With a good text typeface, pattern recognition is automatic. But Old English is incredibly ornate. It has dense, heavy black strokes, sharp, unpredictable angles, and these elaborate flourishes hanging off the letters.
So the word shapes aren't predictable anymore.
Right. Your brain can no longer quickly recognize the silhouette of the word the or castle. It has to actively work to decode the shape of almost every single letter before it can assemble the word.
Wow.
So the cognitive friction spikes. Your eyes would physically tire out. The actual muscles controlling your eyes would fatigue from the erratic jumping.
From just reading.
Yes. You'd get a headache, your reading comprehension would plummet, and you'd likely abandon the book after 3 pages. The decorative elements completely overwhelm the reader's cognitive capacity. It is a massive, fundamental design failure to use a display font for body text.
I love that. I never really thought about reading as a physical workout for the eyes. But it absolutely is.
It really is.
So the graphic designer's job is to manage the reader's physical energy. Display typefaces grab your attention. They are the loud music at the entrance of a party. Text typefaces are the comfortable chairs in the back room where you can actually sit down and have a deep 2-hour conversation.
That is a perfect metaphor. You wouldn't want to sit next to the giant speakers all night, and you wouldn't want a boring beige chair as the centerpiece of your dance floor.
Ah, true.
And this applies to the other subcategories of display fonts too, like script and decorative typefaces.
Right, the source brings those up as well. Script typefaces mimic handwriting or calligraphy, ranging from rough brushstrokes to elegant penning swoops.
Yeah.
And decorative typefaces are the novelty looks fonts that look like neon tubes or stencil cutouts or dripping blood.
These are specialty tools. They are the spices in the kitchen.
Okay, spices.
Yeah, like if you're designing a wedding invitation, a beautiful calligraphic script adds the perfect flavor of elegance and intimacy. But you wouldn't want to read a 40-page legal contract set in a script font.
God, no.
You use the spice sparingly. You don't make a whole meal out of it.
So if display fonts are the loud music and the strong spices and text fonts are the comfortable chairs, we need to look closer at the architecture of those chairs.
Let's do it.
Because if we zoom in on the text typefaces, the workhorses of the design world, we find a massive historical fault line that splits graphic design right down the middle. We are talking about the difference between serif and sans serif typefaces.
This is where typography essentially turns into archaeology. We are digging into the strata of human history.
It really is. Let's start with serifs. The source material traces their origin all the way back to the Romans.
Ancient Rome.
Yeah, we're talking about ancient Rome, stone shrines, public buildings, monuments. The Romans used chisel-cut letterforms to carve words into marble. But stone carving is an imperfect science.
Very imperfect.
To hide the ragged, cracked ends of the letterforms where the chisel stopped, the stonemasons would cut a short, extra stroke perpendicular to the ends of the main lines. That extra little cut is the serif.
Yeah, the physics of stone carving literally dictated the shape of the alphabet.
That is crazy.
When a mason hits marble with a chisel, the end of the line tends to fracture or taper unevenly. It's incredibly difficult to get a perfectly flat, clean, blunt stop in raw stone.
So they had to fix it somehow.
Exactly. So to clean up those messy edges, to give the letter a defined boundary, they added that cap. It was essentially a construction patch. It was a masonry hack.
And here is what absolutely blows my mind. A stylistic choice that we make every single day on our laptops, like clicking a drop-down menu and selecting Times New Roman to type an email, stems from the physical limitations of an ancient Roman hammer and chisel.
Yep.
We are looking at a 2,000-year-old rock carving workaround rendered in glowing pixels on an OLED screen.
It is an unbroken chain of human engineering. The medium changed from stone to parchment to metal to photographic film to digital pixels, but that little finishing stroke survived.
Why did it survive so long, though? Just tradition.
Partly tradition, but it survived mainly because it turned out to have an incredible unintended biological benefit.
Oh, going back to the saccadic eye movements.
Exactly. When you line up hundreds of letters with serifs, those tiny horizontal strokes at the bottom of the letters link together to create an invisible, continuous baseline.
Oh, like a track.
Yes, it creates a rail for your eye to ride on. It guides the reader horizontally across the page, preventing the eye from wandering up or down into the other lines of text.
That is brilliant.
What started as a way to hide jagged rock became an essential psychological tool for reading efficiency.
But as history marches on, the world changes. The source contrasts the ancient Roman serif with the birth of the sans serif, sans being the French word for without.
Right, without serifs.
The sans serif typeface was born out of the Industrial Revolution. It stripped away the serifs for a smooth, unadorned, streamlined look that reflected a modern aesthetic.
Think about the philosophical shift of the Industrial Revolution. It was a total paradigm shift. Society was moving away from the handmade, the artisanal, the agricultural, and the ancient.
Right, moving towards factories.
We were entering the era of mass production, steel, steam engines, perfectly machined parts, and brutal efficiency. The ornate, historical, humanist look of serif typefaces felt old-fashioned. It felt tied to the aristocracy in the church.
They wanted typography that looked like a factory. They wanted letters that looked like they were manufactured by a machine, not chiseled by a guy in a toga or drawn by a monk with a feather.
Exactly. Stripping away the serifs left pure, unadorned geometry. It was a total rejection of the past. The sans serif communicated speed, clarity, mass communication, and democracy.
Wow.
It was the visual equivalent of a steel girder. And that psychological association remains just as strong today. When a legacy brand wants to signal that they are modern, clean, and tech-forward, what is the first thing they do?
They drop their old serif logo and switch to a sleek, geometric sans serif.
Every time.
We've seen it 100 times.
Yeah.
Fashion brands, tech companies, car manufacturers. It's a visual shortcut for, we are living in the future, we have no baggage.
But I'd argue it's a double-edged sword. When everyone strips away the serifs, everything starts to look the exact same. You lose the warmth, the heritage, the human touch.
Which is probably why the serif family didn't just die out entirely.
Not at all.
While the sans serifs were busy embracing this uniform industrial modernity, the serif typefaces continued to evolve over centuries into highly distinct, specialized subcategories. If you look closely, not all serifs are created equal.
Definitely not.
The source provides this incredible breakdown of how the serif evolved, using the lowercase letter b as a visual guide.
This is where our detective training really begins. We are looking at the microarchitecture of the letter B.
We have 4 main subcategories of serif typefaces: Old-style Roman, Transitional Roman, Modern Roman, and Egyptian or slab serif.
Okay, let's walk through these.
I want to start with Old-style Roman. The text says these are styled after classic Roman inscriptions and early humanist handwriting. If I'm looking closely at an Old-style B, what am I physically seeing in the strokes?
You are seeing the ghost of the calligrapher's hand.
The ghost of the hand.
Yeah, imagine someone drawing the letter B with a broad-nibbed calligraphy pen. Because the pen is held at a consistent angle, as the hand moves up and down to draw the circular bowl of the B, the thickness of the ink naturally changes.
Right, depending on the angle of the nib.
Exactly. It creates a gradual, organic transition from the thick parts of the curve to the thin parts. And then look at the serifs themselves, the little feet at the bottom of the vertical stem. In an old-style font, they are what we call bracketed.
Bracketed, meaning they don't just stick out at a sharp, rigid right angle.
Right. There's a gentle, sweeping curve that transitions from the vertical stem into the horizontal serif.
Like the roots of an old oak tree gradually flaring out into the soil.
That is exactly it. That flare is the bracket. It feels organic, warm, and distinctly human because it mimics the fluid motion of a pen lifting off the paper. Typefaces like Garamond or Caslon fall into this category.
They feel like sitting in a leather armchair in an old library.
Perfect description.
Moving forward in time, we hit Transitional Roman. As the name suggests, this is the bridge between the old and the new.
Right.
The text shows that transitional fonts have more thick and thin contrast than the older styles, but the serifs are becoming more horizontal and less organic.
The printing technology was improving. We were moving away from the strict imitation of handwriting. The true roots are getting less curved, and the contrast between the thick and thin parts is increasing.
So it's getting sharper.
The geometry is becoming a bit more rigid, a bit more rational. John Baskerville's typefaces are the perfect example of this. They are clean, precise, but still highly readable.
But then we hit the extreme end of the spectrum. Modern Roman typefaces. And this is where things get radical.
Very radical.
The source notes that modern Roman typefaces show an extreme contrast between thick and thin strokes with sharp, thin serifs. The transition from thick to thin is abrupt, and the serifs are completely unbracketed.
If old-style Roman is an oak tree with roots, modern Roman is a polished steel needle balancing perfectly on a sheet of glass.
Oh, wow.
The vertical stem of the letter B is incredibly thick, bold, and heavy, but the horizontal parts, the top and bottom curves of the bowl, are shockingly razor-thin, almost like a hairline.
And the serifs has absolutely no curve, no roots. The thick vertical stem hits the hairline horizontal serif at a perfectly sharp, rigid 90-degree angle.
It is pure engineered elegance. Typefaces like Bodoni or Dido fall into this category.
Yeah, I know those.
Yeah, when you see them, you immediately think of high fashion. They are the fonts used on the covers of Vogue or Harper's Bazaar. They look expensive, sophisticated, and icy.
But I want to challenge this from a functional standpoint.
Okay, go for it.
It looks glamorous at 72 points on a magazine cover. But what happens if you try to use Bodoni for the actual article text inside the magazine? Isn't it functionally terrible?
It is disastrous for body text.
I know.
We call it the dazzle effect. Because the contrast is so extreme when you shrink modern Roman down to 10-point font,
Wow.
those hairline horizontal strokes, literally disappear.
Oh, because they're too thin.
Right. The printing press can't hold the ink, or the computer screen doesn't have enough pixels to render them cleanly, so the letters end up looking like a barcode of thick, vertical black lines.
That sounds awful to read.
Your eye can't track the shapes, and it induces an almost immediate headache. It is the ultimate display font masking as a traditional serif.
That is fascinating. Beauty at the total expense of function.
Absolutely.
And finally, we have a complete departure from that delicate elegance. The Egyptian or slab serif typeface.
Of the heavy hitters.
The source notes they are also called square serifs. They have even strokes with absolutely no thick and thin contrast and unbracketed square horizontal serifs.
Yeah, so take that elegant modern Roman letter and just throw it right out the window. Make every single line, every curve, and every serif exactly the same heavy, brutal thickness.
So the serif isn't a delicate little foot anymore.
No, it is a massive, chunky, rectangular slab.
It looks like a cinder block.
It is a cinder block. These typefaces exploded in the 1800s specifically for advertising. It was the birth of the billboard.
Oh, that makes sense.
Advertisers needed letters that were loud, robust, that wouldn't break easily in the massive industrial printing presses, and that grabbed your attention from across a crowded street.
Think of old wanted posters from the Wild West, or the branding for heavy machinery like Caterpillar.
Exactly. Or college sports team jerseys. They are sturdy, industrial, aggressive, and incredibly loud.
It is astonishing to me how just manipulating the thickness of a line and the geometric shape of a serif takes you on this incredible emotional journey.
It really does.
From the warm humanist handwritten old style to the icy high fashion modern, all the way to the heavy machinery cinder block, the slab serif. And underneath it all, they are still fundamentally just the letter B.
They are just different suits of armor placed over the exact same skeletal structure of the alphabet.
So we've categorized the shapes. We know our serif from our sans serif, our old style from our slab. But if we really want to master typography, we have to look past the shapes and understand the physical space they occupy.
We have to measure them.
Right, we have to know how to measure them. And it turns out the digital measurements we use every single day in our software are literal ghosts of heavy metal.
Yes.
We are haunted by the 19th century.
This is one of my favorite topics because it's a measurement system that billions of people use daily, but practically no one actually understands what they are doing.
Like when you select 12-point font in a drop-down menu, what on earth does the number 12 actually represent?
Exactly. Most people have no idea.
The source gets incredibly specific here. It introduces the point as the unit for measuring the height of type. It says a point measures 0.0138 of an inch, or 3.515 millimeters.
Very precise.
And it states there are exactly 72.27 points in an inch. And there is a very deep physical, historical reason for this highly specific, slightly awkward number.
There is.
The text explicitly points out that the point system goes back to the days of metal type, when sizes were classified according to the metal slug that held each character.
To really grasp this, you have to mentally step back in time, visualize a letterpress printer shop from 200 years ago, smell the ink and the oil.
Okay, I'm there.
When a printer wanted to print the letter A, they didn't just have a flat stamp of the letter. That letter was cast in relief on the top end of a rectangular block of lead alloy, a physical heavy metal slug.
So it's a 3D object, it has weight, depth, and height.
Exactly. And here's the crucial part. The point size didn't measure the actual printed letter itself.
Wait, it didn't?
No, it didn't measure the ink that goes on the page. It measured the height of the physical metal block that the letter sat on.
Oh, wow.
That block had to be standardized perfectly so you could lock thousands of these little metal pieces together in a massive frame, tighten it with wedges, and put it on a printing press without all the letters just falling out.
Right, because if one block was slightly taller, the whole frame would be loose.
Precisely. The metal blocks had to fit together seamlessly, so the industry standardized it. Roughly 72 points of metal equaled 1 inch.
So even though we are entirely digital now, when I sit at a coffee shop on my MacBook and choose 72-point type in Photoshop, I am basically telling my screen to render a letter as if it were sitting on a literal 1-inch tall block of virtual Lee.
Yes, it is a skeuomorph. It's a digital hangover from a mechanical past. The interface of your ultra-modern laptop is still blindly obeying the spatial geometry of a 19th century lead foundry.
That is just wild, and the ghosts go even deeper.
Oh, they do.
The source explains line spacing, the vertical distance between lines of type, which it calls leading pronounced leading.
Yes, leading, like the metal.
Right. It says leading is also measured in points, and it gives the origin.
Yeah.
It derived from metal type, where actual strips of lead were inserted between lines of type.
Again, picture the metal blocks. If you have rows of those metal letter blocks lined up next to each other, forming sentences, and you stack the next sentence directly on top of it, the metal blocks are physically touching.
The text would look incredibly cramped.
It would be suffocating. The descenders of the top line would crash right into the ascenders of the bottom line.
So what did they do?
To create vertical breathing room between the lines of text, the typesetter would literally reach over, grab thin, blank strips of lead, which were cast in specific point thicknesses, and physically drop them between the rows of type before locking the press.
They were adding lead.
Hence, leading. So today, when you adjust the line height or the leading in Adobe InDesign or Word, you are digitally simulating the physical labor of a typesetter dropping strips of heavy metal between your sentences.
And the source gives us a very practical rule for this today. It notes that leading is typically 1 to 2 points more than the point size of a typeface.
That's the standard rule of thumb.
So if your text is 10 point, your leading should be 11 or 12 points. And it explains exactly why. This extra space accommodates the ascenders and descenders.
We should define those for anyone who might not know. Ascenders are the parts of the lowercase letters that reach up like the tall stems on a D, H, or K.
And descenders are the parts that drop below the baseline, like the tail of a PQ or Y.
Exactly.
If you don't add that extra strip of lead, the descenders of the top line will literally crash into the ascenders of the bottom line.
It creates a visual collision. The page looks tangled, like a thicket of thorns. Adding those 1 or 2 points of leading separates the lanes of traffic. It ensures the eye can track horizontally without getting caught on the letterforms dangling from above or poking up from below.
Okay, so moving horizontally across the page, the text also discusses line length. It says the horizontal length of a line of type is traditionally measured in picas.
Picas, yes.
There are 6.0230 picas in 1 inch. So a pica is a larger chunk of measurement than a point.
Yes, there are exactly 12 points in 1 pica. It's the macro measurement for layout design.
So points are for the small stuff, picas for the big stuff.
Right. You measure the micro, the height of the type, and the space between lines and points. You measure the macro, the width of the text column, and the margins of the page in picas. It's a base 12 system that allowed typesetters to do mental math very quickly when building a page grid.
And finally, when we talk about space, we have to talk about letter spacing. The text defines this as the distance between characters in a word and between words in a line of type.
Also known as trapping or kerning.
Right. The alternative terms are tracking for overall space or kerning for the space between 2 specific letters. But the text gives a major warning here.
It's a big warning.
It says adding letter spacing to a word gives it a different aesthetic that may add design value in single words, but a lack of legibility makes this technique inappropriate for lengthy amounts of text.
This brings us right back to cognitive psychology and word shapes. By stretching out the space between letters, you can change the texture of a word entirely. If you take a clean sans serif font, make it very small, and track it out incredibly wide across the top of a page, it forces the viewer to slow down. It feels airy, luxurious, deliberate, and expensive. It's a classic trick for high-end perfume or jewelry ads.
Oh, I can totally picture that, like a luxury brand logo.
Exactly. But the warning is, never do this to a whole paragraph.
Why? What happens?
Because when we read a paragraph, our brain doesn't read individual letters. We recognize the silhouette, the bounding box of the entire word. You recognize the shape of the word apple instantly.
Right, I don't read APPLE.
No, if you add heavy tracking, if you spread all the letters far apart, you completely destroy that word shape. The silhouette shatters.
Oh, so the brain can't recognize it at a glance anymore.
Exactly. The brain is forced to switch cognitive gears. Instead of recognizing words, it has to read every individual letter one by one to mentally assemble the word.
It sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. You can break the rules for a logo, but you respect the biology of the reader when it comes to a paragraph.
It's all about balancing the visual impact with the biological function. Okay, so we've covered the history, we understand the categories, and we know our measurements. Now it's time to put on our magnifying glasses. We are getting into typographic detective work.
This is where we separate the amateurs from the professionals.
I'm ready. The source dedicates a whole section to ways to identify typefaces. And it points out something really crucial. Display fonts are easy. If you see Old English or a crazy 1970s bubble font, you instantly know what it is. The characteristics are loud.
Right, they scream their identity.
But identifying typefaces within the text category, distinguishing one standard sans serif from another, is notoriously difficult. You have to hunt for microscopic clues.
It's like a police lineup where every single suspect is a man of the exact same height, wearing an identical tailored gray suit.
That's a great image.
At first glance, they look exactly the same. You have to look incredibly close at the shape of the jawline, the angle of the nose, or the subtle curve of the ear to tell them apart.
And the text provides a brilliant visual example to prove this point. It shows the uppercase A set in 3 different sans serif fonts: Arial, Avant-Garde, and Futura.
Yes.
And honestly, if you isolate just the uppercase A, they look virtually identical. It's just a triangle with a crossbar. But the book gives us 2 specific clues to break the case wide open. Clue number 1, the X height.
This is one of the most defining characteristics of any typeface.
The text notes that the X height of the letters in the Futura sample is noticeably smaller than those in Arial and Avant-Garde. So for our listeners who aren't looking at a typographic grid, what exactly is the X height?
Okay, imagine drawing horizontal lines to contain the letters. You draw a line at the bottom where all the letters rest, that's the baseline. You draw a line across the very top of the capital letters, that's the cap height.
Okay, baseline and cap height.
The X height is the distance from the baseline to the top of the flat lowercase letters, like a lowercase x, e, or o. It represents the main body or torso of the lowercase alphabet.
And how does that help us identify Futura versus Arial?
It changes the entire proportion of the text. If a font has a small X height, it means the lowercase letters are relatively short compared to the towering uppercase letters.
Okay, I see.
Futura is famous for its very tall ascenders and tiny X height. It gives the text a very elegant, airy, geometric, mid-century modern feel.
Arial.
Arial, on the other hand, was designed with a massive X height. The lowercase letters take up almost the entire vertical space. It makes the letters look bulky, sturdy, and highly legible, even on terrible, low-resolution computer screens.
So clue number 1 is comparing the proportion of the lowercase letters to the capitals. But clue number 2 is my absolute favorite because it's a dead giveaway.
It really is.
The text says to look specifically at the lowercase a. It points out that the lowercase a in Arial differs fundamentally from the a in Avant-Garde and Futura.
Yes, it is the difference between a double-story A and a single-story A.
Let's describe that for the listener. Arial uses a double-story A. It has a rounded bowl at the bottom, and then a vertical stem on the right side that curves up and over the top, creating a kind of hook, an awning, or a second story over the bowl.
Exactly.
But Avant-Garde and Futura use a single-story A. It is just a perfect geometric circle with a straight vertical line attached to the right side. It looks exactly like the A you learned to draw with a crayon in kindergarten.
That one single letter instantly divides the entire sans serif universe into 2 opposing camps.
Just that one letter.
Just that one. If you were trying to identify a font, and you see that straight geometric single-story A, you can immediately rule out Arial, Helvetica, and Universe, a massive shortcut.
And the text does the exact same detective work for serif typefaces. It compares 3 classic text fonts: Palatino, Georgia, and Times New Roman. Again, the uppercase A's look incredibly similar. How do we differentiate these traditional heavyweights?
The book brings us right back to the anatomy of the serif itself. It says comparing the style of the serifs helps identify the font. The Palatino and Times New Roman samples have bracketed serifs. Those are the organic ones we talked about that flare out like tree roots where they join the stem.
Right, the traditional look.
But the Georgia sample does not.
Now, I've stopped you there because I always think of Georgia as a deeply traditional, bookish font. Why doesn't it have those traditional bracketed serifs?
This is a brilliant piece of design history. Georgia wasn't designed for a printing press. It was designed in the 1990s by the legendary typographer Matthew Carter specifically for Microsoft.
For computers.
Yes. Its entire purpose was to be read on low-resolution, chunky computer screens. Carter knew that delicate, sweeping, bracketed curves would be completely destroyed by the square grid of early computer pixels.
Oh, wow.
So he designed Georgia with broader, sturdier, flatter serifs. He basically pre-pixelated the design in his head so it would snap perfectly to the screen's grid. It looks traditional, but its architecture is ruthlessly modern and digital.
That is genius, designing for the limitations of the medium.
Exactly.
The text also highlights 2 specific lowercase letters for serif detective work: the G and the F. It explicitly states, Comparing lowercase letter forms, especially G's and F's, is a good way to note subtle differences. Notice how the loop on the G's descender differs between typefaces as well as the form of the letter F.
The lowercase g is a typographic playground. It is arguably the most complex letter in the alphabet.
Really, more than the A.
Oh, definitely. Like the A, it comes in two major structures. You have the single-story G, which is a circle with a simple hook hanging down below the baseline, like a fish hook.
Sure.
And then you have the double-story G, which is a masterpiece of balance. It has a top bowl, a little ear sticking out the top right, a stem connecting downwards, and then a bottom loop that circles back on itself.
Right, the one that looks kind of like a pair of glasses stacked on top of each other.
Exactly. And every single type designer tackles the double-story G differently. Sometimes the bottom loop is completely closed, sometimes it's left slightly open, sometimes the little ear points straight out, sometimes it droops down.
So it's very distinct.
If you are ever trying to identify a serif font, hunt down a lowercase g. It is practically a biometric fingerprint.
And the F as well. The specific curve of the top hook. How far the horizontal crossbar extends to the left or the right. It's amazing how much personality, history, and engineering is packed into a tiny fraction of an inch of black space.
It completely shifts how you experience the printed word. You stop seeing text merely as a vehicle for language, and you start seeing the letters as microscopic sculptures interacting with each other.
Which perfectly transitions us into the culmination of this source material. We've learned the history, the measurements, and the microscopic clues. Once you know how to spot these details, you start to realize just how massive the catalog of typefaces really is, and how they function as highly specific, nuanced tools.
The source material ends with an extensive type guide, showing actual visual specimens of dozens of typefaces. It's the designer's armory.
And it introduces this massive section with a really beautiful summary. It says, type can be timeless or trendy. It can express a mood or an attitude. It can function as shape or line in a composition, or as a pattern or texture. I want to pause on that last word, texture.
Yeah, that's an important one.
How does text become texture? We usually think of texture as something you can physically touch, like velvet or sandpaper.
To see typographic texture, you have to do a little visual trick.
Okay, what is it?
Look at a full page of printed text, but squint your eyes so the words become blurry and unreadable.
Okay, so you can't read it anymore.
Right. You stop seeing individual letters and you just see a block of gray color on the page. We actually call it typographic color. Depending on the typeface, the weight, and the leading, that texture changes dramatically.
Like how dark or light it is.
Exactly. A light, thin sans serif font with generous leading creates a very airy, silvery open texture. But a heavy serif font, set very tightly together, creates a dark, dense, almost intimidating charcoal texture.
Oh, I see.
Designers use this literal texture to compose the page visually, balancing heavy, dark blocks of text against light, open, negative space to guide your emotional reaction to the page before you even read a word.
That's incredible. Now, the guide is divided into two main sections to help designers navigate this. First, it lists display typefaces by name only, organizing them into decorative, scripts, or period looks.
The loud ones.
Right. It lists novelty names like Aiken, Balloon, Dom Casual, Impact, Old English Text, and Stencil. Then scripts like Bauhaus and Broadway.
Just hearing those names instantly evokes highly specific imagery in your mind.
It really does.
If I say Broadway, you instantly picture the 1920s Art Deco geometry, jazz, and neon marquees. If I say Stencil, you instantly picture military equipment, shipping crates, and industrial grit. They are pure, undiluted mood.
But the bulk of the guide is dedicated to the text typefaces. And this is where we see the true staggering scale of the type families that we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation.
Yes, the huge families.
The source shows the full alphabets and numbers for many of the style variations available within a single family. It is mind-boggling to see it laid out visually. Let's look closely at the Universe family listed here.
Ah, Adrian Frutiger's absolute masterpiece.
The text lists Universe 45 Light, Universe 55, Universe 55 Oblique, Universe 65 Bold, Universe 75 Black, Universe 57 Condensed, and Universe 53 Extended. It's not just a list of names, it's a whole mathematical coordinate system.
It is entirely mathematical, and it completely revolutionized graphic design.
Oh, so?
Well, before Frutiger designed Universe in the 1950s, type families were a total mess.
Yeah.
You'd have names like semi-bold italic or extra condensed heavy, and there was absolutely no standard across different foundries.
Just totally arbitrary names.
Completely. Frutiger wanted to replace that confusing language with a logical numerical grid system. The first digit indicates the weight of the stroke. 4 is light, 5 is normal, 7 is bold, 9 is black.
Okay, so the first number is weight.
Right. The second digit indicates the width and posture. 5 is a normal width, 7 is condensed, and even numbers indicate an italic or oblique angle.
So instantly, Universe 75 tells a designer exactly where that font sits in space. It's bold and it's standard width.
Exactly. It was a brilliant, systematic way to catalog a massive, unified family of type.
And the guide does the exact same thing for Helvetica, listing an entire roster. New Helvetica Ultralight, thin, light, medium, medium metallic, bold, heavy, black, condensed, and extended.
Helvetica has an enormous family.
It's just row after row of subtle variation. The alphabet shown for Helvetica Ultralight is so incredibly thin it literally looks like a spider web. And then a few lines down, Helvetica Black looks thick, dense, unmovable, and aggressive.
Helvetica is arguably the most famous typeface in the world. It is the ultimate expression of the neutral geometric sans serif. Yes, it is designed to be perfectly clear, perfectly legible, and completely devoid of inherent meaning so that the corporate brand using it can inject their own meaning into it.
Now I have to push back on Helvetica.
Oh, here we go.
It's everywhere. Every major corporation, subway system, and tech company uses it. But doesn't that pursuit of perfect, neutral clarity actually make it completely sterile?
A lot of people feel that way.
If Helvetica is devoid of meaning, isn't it just the typographic equivalent of an empty beige cubicle? Like, we stripped away the serifs, we stripped away the humanity, and we just ended up with corporate hegemony.
That is the exact debate that has raged in design circles for 50 years. You are hitting on the core philosophical divide in typography.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes, its critics argue exactly what you just said, that Helvetica is the font of conformity, globalization, and faceless corporations. It is the visual language of bureaucracy.
Right.
But its defenders, and I tend to lean this way, argue that true neutrality is the highest form of service a typeface can provide.
How is being neutral a service?
Because Helvetica gets completely out of the way. It allows the information, whether it's a subway sign telling you how to get home or a medical label telling you a dosage to be communicated, with zero friction and zero ambiguity.
So the sterility is the point.
The sterility is the feature. It doesn't judge the information, it just delivers it perfectly.
That is a brilliant defense.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate glass window, completely transparent, and that really highlights the utility of this entire type guide. As the text implicitly shows, this isn't just a catalog to buy things from, it's a reference source to match moods, expressions, historical contexts, and attitudes.
Exactly.
If a designer is laying out an annual report for a conservative 100-year-old bank, they might reference the guide to find a sturdy, reliable serif with bracketed roots, like Caramond. It whispers tradition and safety.
Right.
But if they're designing an interface for a sleek new AI startup, they're going to look at the variations of a sans serif, like Helvetica or Frutiger, to signal the cutting edge. It's all about finding the exact right tool to manipulate the reader's subconscious.
You are choosing the invisible architecture that will shape the reader's reality.
Well, we have covered an immense, complex landscape today. Let's synthesize this journey. We started by defining our terms, learning that a typeface is the artistic, intellectual blueprint, while the font is the digital or physical tool we use to build the house.
Right.
We explored the biological reality of reading, learning that designers must constantly balance the high legibility of text typefaces, smoothing the way for our saccadic eye movements against the emotional, attention-grabbing impact of display typefaces.
And we trace the history of graphic design from the marble monuments of ancient Roman stonemasons, whose chisel hacks gave birth to the serifs we still use as visual baselines today.
Yeah, that was amazing.
And we followed that timeline all the way to the unornamented sans serifs that mirrored the brutal efficiency and progress of the Industrial Revolution.
We looked at the physical ghosts living inside our laptops, too. We discovered how our digital measurements of points and picas and the very concept of leading a line of text are direct, unbroken descendants of heavy metal slugs and actual strips of lead from 19th century letterpress printing.
It's all still there.
We learned how to be typographic detectives, finding the subtle clues in the proportion of an X height, or the single-story shape of a lowercase a, or the complex fingerprint of a G, to identify the specific architecture holding up the words we read every day.
It's a completely different way of seeing the world. You move from being a passive reader to an active observer of the built environment.
Before we go, a quick reminder to you, the listener. If this deep dive changed how you look at the printed word, please hit that subscribe button. It tells us you want to keep exploring the hidden layers of the world.
Please do.
And again, if you want to see all these beautiful variations of universe, the stark neutrality of Helvetica, the warmth of Garamond, and the historic evolution of the letter B with your own eyes, grab the physical book graphic design reference plus specification. You can scan the QR code right now or find the link in the description below.
I'd like to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Go for it.
The next time you open a document on your computer or you're reading an article on a glowing screen, take a moment before you actually read the words. Look at the invisible grid of points dictating the height. Look at the invisible lead creating the breathing room between the lines. Look closely at the specific shapes of the letters themselves, the serifs, the bowls, the stems.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But realize that you are not just looking at a digital interface, you are looking at an unbroken chain of human engineering stretching back through the Industrial Revolution, through medieval calligraphy, all the way to ancient stonemasons in Rome. You aren't just reading text, you are interacting with thousands of years of human history hiding right there in plain sight.
And the next time you see a sign set entirely in an intricate Old English font, well, maybe just give your eye muscles a quick rest afterward. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.